I'm going to go on the record and say the Big 12 making less money than the rest of the conferences is probably not a good thing. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, chasing the Savannah Bananas. Thanks for making Locked On Big 12 your first listen every single day as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's cover the Big 12, getting some really bad news from the College Football Playoff Committee. We'll also go through Kansas losing to Cincinnati, BYU winning, Kansas State and TCU being heroes of the conference. And today is a massive day in Kansas City to settle the Big 12 eventually. This conference got news that it probably didn't want to get, and news that Brett Yormark is likely going to have to vote for. He's handcuffed into saying yes to, and that is less revenue from the College Football Playoff Committee. Per Dennis Dodd, who is a very reputable source at CBS, the College Football Playoff revenue breakdown beginning in 2026 includes the following. The SEC will get 29%. The Big Ten will get 29%. The ACC, 17%. And the Big 12, 15%. We have been told now by the College Football Playoff Committee, the ones who decide who wins the national championship and who gets the most money out of the national championship and the way it is divvied out, that the Big 12 is not only inferior to the SEC and the Big 10, but now also the ACC, 2% behind that conference. Now, I want to give you one caveat before we get into the gloom and doom, because there are some gloom and doom aspects of this. That's a 14% gap between the Big 12, the SEC, the Big 10. That's not good. When you are almost being doubled up by another conference, the idea of you staying alive is not great. And I should also, I told you I was going to get into the good news, and I just haven't. But I told you with the Pac-12 had the writing on the wall. They knew when they were going to die and how it was going to happen. I don't believe the Big 12 will die, but if something like this stays put, that's what it looks like, right? Like all these Pac-12 fans, like, oh, we'll never die. We're fine. We'll wait till we go shopping in the Big 12. For the Big 12, we're staring like I'm looking at the writing on the wall right now that says you are making half as much. The SEC is making twice as much as you. Do you think you'll stay alive? The only reprieve that I can get here, and this isn't good. The only reprieve that I can get here is the fact that the Big 12 and Brett Yormark are fighting for a clause that allows this conference to make more money if it goes out and expands with other teams. This is from Buffalo OK State on Twitter, who you've probably never heard of, but I loved this response to the Dennis Dodd tweet. It says, the ACC has one extra team. This difference per team really isn't all that much. Roughly $12.2 million per Big 12 team to $13 million per ACC team. Not great, but is what it is. And I think that encapsulates it. Not great, but is what it is. I don't love the fact that the Big 12 teams are making less than the Big 12 itself is making less than the ACC, but it is what it is right now. And even better, Buffalo OK State says, just a guess. But reporting was Yormark was asking for a look-in to be added if realignment occurs, and that hits the nail on the head. There is your good news here. Yormark is fighting for the idea that, okay, give us less now. I guess I have to agree to that, but give us more later when we expand with Pitt, with Louisville, with, in a dream scenario, a Clemson or a Miami. And I know that might sound absurd to you, but I have given, if you're an everydayer, I have given examples of how those things could happen, of how Clemson is just a Kansas State who wins for 10 years, of how Miami is not as valuable as we like to make them out to be to the SEC and to the Big Ten. And I do believe brands like that can be in the Big 12. And if that happens, the Big 12 can rise back into a position to make as much money as the SEC and the Big 10 because of the look-in. Because of the look-in that Brett Yormark is looking for from the College Football Playoff Committee. Now, what you might be wondering, and what I wondered at first too, is why would Brett Yormark agree to this? Why would Yormark say, fine, give us less money? This is something that we will just have to deal with, and we'll all go home and be happy. What else do you do? This is the same thing for the president over at Washington State, Kirk Schultz. When they said, hey, we're going to change it from a 6+6 format to a 5+7, it's like the guy's kind of handcuffed. The last thing you want to do is tick everybody off and say, nope, I'm going to be the guy that stands here and says, I'm not leaving this room. I'm not leaving this negotiation until we fix it and make it even. And guess what? The reason he truly can't be that guy is because it's not even. The Big 12, from a revenue standpoint, is far behind the Big 10 and the SEC. We know that. My fight, your fight, is for the Big 12 to stay alive. Brett Yormark's fight is for the Big 12 to stay alive. So what you have to do in the intermediate is play the game. I know I'm biased. I know I would like to keep doing the lockdown. You see the lockdown Big 12 over there? I would like to keep doing this podcast. I know I'm biased in that regard, but I do believe the way the Big 12 retains its power in college football, it's Brett Yormark saying, fine, I'll do it. I'll agree to 15% from the College Football Playoff Committee. However, there must be a clause that if expansion or realignment occurs in any of these conferences, we rework it. Now, that could also mean tomorrow the ACC loses Miami, Clemson, UNC, and Florida State to the Big Ten. I don't think it's going to happen. Let's say it does. Then the ACC certainly makes less than what the Big 12 is going to bring in. That is what Brett Yormark's stipulation means. But when you are handcuffed into this, it's like, oh, buddy, we just arrested you, and it's either an eventual path to the guillotine or you can be out on parole in 14 days, but this crime stays on your record. It's like, I don't like the crime staying on my record, but I do like the idea that parole is a possibility, and I don't like impending death and doom. That's what you have to go for here. Another Twitter comment to this stuff, and this one comes on a comment on a post to the 10-12 network, who I think stand up. Philip Slavin does a stand-up job covering the Big 12. Says Brett Yormark has got plans to make a move on the ACC. 15% plus 17% is more than the 29% the SEC and the Big 10 each have. That's from AJ Eigel. That sounds crazy. You're like, oh, well, how could the Big 12 take its percentage of 15% and add it with the 17% of the ACC? There's no way to do that, right? Well, wait a second. That 17% from the ACC does not include Boston College. I know that in essence it does, but that is not a team bringing in revenue to that league. That does not include Wake Forest. That is not a team bringing revenue into the league. It doesn't include Syracuse. If the Big 12 goes and gets 4 major brands from the ACC, then at that point, this thing truly does get more even. And I don't think there is an avenue that Eigel proposes here that the Big 12 could be bigger than the SEC or the Big 10 quite yet. But what it does, it makes it competitive. When you go and get the teams that are giving the ACC 17% revenue share from the college football playoff, at that point, you start to even the field and give yourself a better shot at having more money. And if you've learned anything from this show or expansion, realignment, all this jazz, money is what makes the world go round. So to me, the Big 12, if it's able to add more ACC schools, if it's able to get that clause written in there that, hey, if realignment happens, we'll rework this whole deal, we're okay. If not, then we're just the 4th place team making a whole lot less money than the SEC and the Big 10. And if we go away, those conferences and the real money doesn't care. And that would be bad. Coming up, Kansas lost on Locked On Big 12, part of the Lockdown Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by, Nissan. Nissan is my favorite place to go because I have a Nissan. So I go to Nissan and I get my cars from Nissan. If you're the kind of driver who likes to put things a little bit further, if you wonder what an adventure could be like around the next corner, our friends at Nissan have a line of SUVs for you. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drivers and great escapes. It's the vehicle, the premier vehicle. It's like Houston. My March Madness comparison would be Houston. It's like just the team that's good. They're an NBA caliber squad. There's nothing about them you think, this isn't great. Maybe they won't win because of this. They have Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system on the new Rogue. And right now, you can take the Nissan Rogue all over the country for your next big adventure at shopnissanusa.com. That is shopnissanusa.com. Get the Houston of cars, get the juggernaut of cars in the NCAA, get the Yukon of cars in the NCAA tournament with Nissan.com/Drive USA. So yesterday in the Big 12 was fun. Kansas losing to Cincinnati, I think, so just generally is the best thing in the world for both of those teams. BYU beating UCF furthers their opportunity to be a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, which I already thought was going to happen. And I know a lot of BYU fans thought, no, win the games in front of you. And I get it. That's fine. We have a difference in opinion-ish on that. We'll get to that game as well. TCU over Oklahoma was a blowout. Wasn't a blowout, and TCU ends up getting it done. I think they have moved themselves off that 8 and 9 line, and the whole idea of TCU winning a game in the Big 12 tournament was to move themselves off the 8 and 9 line and not play UConn in round of 32. That would not have been very good. And then Kansas State down by 10 at halftime to Texas. Can I tell you, Kansas State is the reason that I drink non-alcoholic things, Dr. Pepper. I watch Kansas State basketball and Jerome Tang. I watch Tyler Perry, and I think there's so much potential here. There's so much potential. And then I just end up frustrated. But in this game, they did the same thing that they do. They frustrated me, but they won. Tyler Perry and company are moving on. He dropped 21 points against Max Abmas and Texas. Now, do I think Oklahoma and Texas both deserve to be in March Madness? Yes. I know that they are going away. They're not going to be in the conference anymore. I still believe, based on what Oklahoma has given you at 8 and 10 in Big 12 play, that gives them a spot at 20 wins. I think 20 wins in the Big 12 gives you a spot in March Madness. For Texas, at 20 wins in the Big 12, 9 and 9 in conference play, those two teams should be locked in. That is 9. We have 9 teams. We know that every team playing today that moved on, like a Texas Tech, Houston, Iowa State, and Baylor, will certainly be in March. We also know that Kansas and BYU will go dancing. I think Oklahoma, TCU, and Texas have made their case, and that's it. They're going to go to the NCAA tournament. But now we have an even better shot to get Cincinnati and Kansas State in. I told you earlier this week that what matters the most to me about Kansas City and the Big 12 tournament is how Kansas State and Cincinnati perform. I want as many teams as possible in the NCAA tournament. And Cincinnati, they scared me at a point. I'm watching the game. I'm rooting hard for the Bearcats. And mind you, quick caveat, the reason I'm rooting for the Bearcats is not because I want to root against Kansas. I'm wearing a Kansas hoodie today. The reason I'm doing that is because I want Cincinnati in the NCAA tournament, and I want Kansas to go home and rest Adams and McCullough and Dickinson. I need Cincinnati. I need 11 teams in March. I need Kansas to get healthy so they can be as good as they can possibly be in March. And then the freaking Jayhawks go on a 9-0 run early in the second half, and it looks like, oh, shoot, what if all is lost? I think they cut the lead at some point to 3. Cincinnati's struggling, and then finally, the offense catches back into gear, and the Bearcats win it 72-52. There was a defined part of this game where KJ Adams goes down for Kansas. And at that point, I could have told you on FanDuel to live bet the heck out of the Bearcats. And the reason why is, see it on Bill Self's face. He didn't want to be here. He understands, as the best coach in college basketball, that there isn't a whole lot of reason to compete in the Big 12 tournament for his team. If they win the Big 12 tournament, cool. If they don't, also cool. They're going to the NCAA tournament. And if your team needs rest, if your team is banged up the same way Kansas is right now, the number one thing that you can do is just rest. You're already in the tournament. That's what Kansas did. For BYU, geez, man, what a start. I just don't. I watch this team, Ali Khalifa. It's magic. I still can you reason with me here? If you're a general Big 12 viewer, do you watch BYU, the team that got up 21-3 against UCF, and think that team scares me? Because yes, the answer is yes. But then I think, is that team a March Madness built team that's going to make a run? I don't know what the pessimistic, cynical part of my brain is in the very back that says, I still what else do I need to see? They keep doing it. Like, what else do I need to see to say BYU is a legitimate Final Four caliber team? They now have 23 wins on the season in their first year in Big 12 play. And I don't think I've done enough content of myself saying BYU is a team that will go to the Final Four or could go to the Final Four. What am I missing? What do I need? I don't know. Maybe they are just a Final Four team. For UCF at 17 and 15, you've bought yourself a ticket to the NIT, and you better accept it. We don't do the whole like, oh, we're not going to do that. Nope, UCF, you need the NIT. Get your guys experience, come back next year, and win. TCU, Oklahoma, same crap here. TCU is up 45-31, and I'm thinking at the very end of the game, like, oh, well, I say the very end. I'm thinking in the middle of the game, oh, if TCU can run away with it. Then I'm thinking at the very end, like, oh, TCU won't run away with it. And it just stresses me out. Can we please all just win our games by as many points as humanly possible from here on out? Because TCU, for a second, didn't want to do that with Manuel Miller and company, who had a really good game, by the way. This was a fun game to watch. I'll give you that. If you were just a general viewer, this was a fun game to watch. But where TCU was running away with it, like 55-40 at one point, or let's say like mid-60s versus mid-40s, like a 65-45. I thought, oh, that we're never going to have to sweat this. TCU is going to win going away. And that was the consensus going up to the last couple minutes. And then I felt like there was a point where TCU just lost momentum. It got within like 6-7 points, and Oklahoma at least made it seem like TCU. Like, here's what I'm trying to say. If you're a TCU fan, you get this. If you've watched Horned Frog basketball in the last 2 weeks, nothing's safe. Nothing's fun. This felt like the game that TCU would find a way to give up in the last 3 minutes, and they didn't. I wish they would have just blown it out. I wish they wouldn't have given me a mini heart attack at the end, but they got it done. Then for Texas, Kansas State, down by 10 at the break, Tyler Perry finally being that guy. What if? 49 points in the second half after only scoring 29 in the first half. Telling you, man, Kansas State, you're my darling. You're my boy, Blue. And coming up, we'll talk about how you can solidify your spot in March Madness. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Amazon Fire TV is what I use. It's where I go. It's like, oh, I want to watch YouTube. Amazon Fire TV. Oh, I want to watch Locked On Big 12. Amazon Fire TV. It is super easy. Fire TV is your destination for sports, live games, highlights, in-depth analysis, and more. Fire TV gives you TV episodes, free TV, live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos for your favorite sports brands. Even Locked On. March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this one. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/Locked On Fire TV. That is Amazon.com/Locked On Fire TV. Today is maybe the most excited I've been about Big 12 basketball in a long time. And it's not because we have Big 12. I love Big 12 basketball all the time. It's because we have insane matchups going on. BYU and Texas Tech, where the Cougars are favored by 1.5. TCU and Houston, where Houston is favored by 10.5 against the Horned Frogs. Kansas State, Iowa State, Cincinnati, Baylor. Can I tell you my dream scenario? BYU loses. Yeah. Houston loses. Yeah. Iowa State loses. Yeah. Baylor loses. The reason that's my dream scenario is because I personally, and maybe you, if you're a new fan of this conference, a Houston fan, a BYU fan, we'll learn this along the lines. I hate the Big 12 tournament. Like a BYU fan, today you might not. Eventually, I think you're going to hate the Big 12 tournament, like Bill Self does. Against Texas Tech, if BYU loses, you just got another quad 1 win. I think you're clear for a 4 seed. I do. I really believe that. You have 23 wins in Big 12, 23 wins overall, double-digit wins in Big 12 play. Go home. Go home. Get rest. If you win the Big 12 tournament, you won't win the national championship. That is what history tells us. That is what we have learned. TCU and Houston. For Houston, you've been banged up. You've played great in big, like a historically good season. A historically good season. Go home. You have nothing to prove to us. Go home. Iowa State against Kansas State. You're the one that I can make the biggest case that you need to win because you need to prove that you lost to Kansas State. That is Iowa State. You lost to Kansas State in Manhattan, and it didn't really matter. It wasn't, that wasn't the right outcome. The right team didn't win. Still go home. Brother, you cannot do anything to prove something different than what you already. You were a 2 seed. Don't do this to yourself. Cincinnati and Baylor. Baylor, I think in my mind, is a 3 seed. It's locked in. Baylor's a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. Go home. And more so than anything, what this does is it gives Cincinnati a top 15 win. Hello, NCAA tournament. It gives Kansas State another top 10 win against the number 7 team in the country, Iowa State. Hello, NCAA tournament. It gives TCU a win against the number 1 team in the country. Hello, 6 seed, ? And it gives Texas Tech a win over BYU, pushing them past that 6 range and into the 5 seed range, where I think they will end up landing when it comes to March Madness. That's what I want. If we want the best for the league means that the best teams today lose their games. Why? Because then those best teams are fresh for March Madness, and those teams that weren't as good or were not favored these games get to go to March Madness. Do you see how this is good for everybody? You get your team into March Madness, and they're excited. You get your team into March Madness, and they're well-rested, and they're ready to go. To me, it is invaluable having 11 teams in the NCAA tournament. That right there sets the world on fire, the NCAA on fire, and everybody looks at this conference and says, how do they do it? I want more of it. That is the best league in the NCAA, and it is indisputable. And maybe as the host of Locked On Big 12, I'm crazy. Maybe I'm crazy for wanting that, for wanting your team to lose. But I think it's going to benefit you. I think it's going to benefit me. I think it's going to benefit the whole conference if the better teams, the higher seeded teams, actually lose today and give way to the lower seeded teams to get better seeding in the NCAA tournament or just get into March. That, to me, is awesome. I'm a sicko, I know. I'm sorry about that. If BYU wins, it's great. If Houston wins, it's great. That's awesome. 2 of the best teams in this conference. If Iowa State and Baylor win, that gives us a beautiful semifinal matchup. And look, it's going to be tough for Cincinnati to win. It's going to be tough for any of these teams who played yesterday to win. They're going on a no day's rest. You get your little sweet night of sleep, and then bam, you're right back at it. But man, it'd be kind of fun to have double-digit teams in the NCAA tournament. This has been It Always Will Be. Come back tomorrow. We'll break down all the games from today. We'll even talk more basketball, more expansion, more football, more whatever you want. You tell me. Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose grande.